So I'm delighted to have the opportunity to present here at the Royal Asiatic Society, where I've been a fellow since 2005, although I think I've managed to actually come into the society twice in all of that time since, because I left the UK shortly after actually becoming a fellow. Thank you to Dr. Utta for including me in the fall schedule and for the kind introduction today. Thank you to Maddie for all the support with scheduling and publicity for this event. And thank you to Professor Ansari and other officers of the Royal Asiatic Society. I appreciate having the opportunity to talk about my new book with you. I'm a scholar of Muslim society in modern South Asia. My first book, based in doctoral work that I completed at SOAS, was on colonial administration and religious mobilization in the Northwest Frontier tribal areas of colonial India. The Mosques of Colonial South Asia was inspired by my continued interest in examining Muslim organization under colonial administration. The colonial administration of India displaced ruler sovereigns and political elites who had assigned resources for mosques. They cancelled the grants of revenue-generating lands and abolished the posts of Mughal law officer who oversaw religious affairs by the 1860s. And soon after, the colonial state also declined responsibility for maintenance and management of places of worship. This is a plan of the courtyard of the Friday Mosque at Delhi. The British Residence Office in Delhi had commissioned repairs to be carried out by a well-known French architect in 1811, and again in 1841 and in 1851. But after 1863, the colonial administration distinguished religious institutions from those that serve the public benefit and characterized religious matters as internal affairs, internal to the community of worship, and not a concern of the secular colonial government of India. But there were numerous variations and tensions in Muslim religious practice. There were the broad divisions created by Shia and Sunni beliefs, and also organization into minor groups characterized by educational pathways, mystical practices, and ritual choices. A variety of political ambitions inspired Muslims, from efforts to resurrect the caliphate to modernist ambitions for Muslim political advancements. Countless disputes relating to South Asia's diverse Muslims' expectations for their mosques arose and were presented in colonial courts. A very few of these cases progressed to the final court of colonial appeals, the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council. Witness testimony, documentation of land rights, and Urdu writings related to these disputes revealed aspects of worshippers' rights in mosques that had not yet been clarified under colonial law. In a dispute dating to 1871 to 1891 in Bihar, the congregation's preferences in rituals associated with prayer in the mosque were debated and brought to the court for clarification. In the case of the Friday Mosque of Rangoon, decided in 1916, congregation members sought to have the courts declare their right to participate in management of the mosque. In the case of the mosque at Bulandshahr in the UP, it was decided in 1916. Worshippers sought clarification of their interests at the junction of the mosque and the street. And in the case of the mosque known as Shahidganj in Lahore, it was decided in 1940, congregants sought a clarification of their right to change the colonial land record that characterized this one-time mosque as the Gurdwara that it had become during the period of Sikh rule of that city. And in Kora Jahanabad, in the United Provinces, it was the right of Muslim society to hold custodians accountable for mismanagement of a mosque that was debated in the court. The decisions in each of these cases at mosques located at Rangoon, Tajpur, Kora Jahanabad, Aurangabad, and Lahore, and including evidence from a variety of mosques in other locations in India, I argue that these decisions authorized officers with authority in matters related to mosques and authorize these officers to exercise discretionary control in and around mosques. The decisions in these cases created legal precedents that would guide other judgments relating to mosques through the colonial period and into the post-colonial period of South Asian history. In the first of the cases that I take up in this book, the case related to the Mosque of Tajpur in Bihar, the story went that it was a Mughal era mosque managed by the Qazi, the Mughal law officer of Sarisa. In the 1862 letter of appointment that you see translated here, a man known as Maula Bakhsh was charged with giving the azan, the call to prayer, and also saying and leading the prayer in the mosque, sweeping the mosque, and making arrangements for visitors. A large number of Muslims in the congregation, tailors by profession, identified as Hanafi in their practices. But Maula Bakhsh, the muezzin, was Ahle Hadith. In prayer, Maula Bakhsh pronounced the Rafidain, the testimony to God's greatness, and the Ameen loudly over the silence that the Hanafis in the congregation preferred and had been the practice in the mosque since Mughal times. By the 1880s, tensions between the congregation and Maula Bakhsh had accelerated and increased to a point that some members of the congregation had physically attacked Maula Bakhsh, and Maula Bakhsh had filed charges against them with the local police. The tension between the Ahle Hadith and Hanafis in this congregation were stoked by a broader confrontation between these two maslaks that was taking place across North India. And the courts heard claims and counterclaims of what was legitimate in Islam, what was recommended, what was permissible, and what was prohibited. Eventually, the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council ruled that members of the congregation did not have a right to assert how the muezzin should conduct the prayer in the mosque, even if the majority of the congregation opposed his choices. Where the congregation had believed that the muezzin was a servant of the state, of Muslim society, and of their collective preferences, the colonial court authorized him as leader of the congregation. The logic for the court's decision was enshrined in that corpus of law known as Anglo-Mohammedan law. The underlying principles that are salient here were that the colonial state believed that jurists in colonial Indian courts should not have to engage with the complexities of Islamic theology, and that mosques and other waqfs were established through the private and personal intent of benefactors, a commission of land and funds into the legal vehicle of a trust. But as the Tajpur case had revealed, profound social differences emerged around finer points of interpretation and spiritualism, and Muslims believed that the nature of worship in a mosque was a concern for society at large. This tension between the state unwilling to intercede in religious affairs and members of Muslim society asking for authoritative resolution of their differences lasted until the end of the colonial period. During this time, the decisions that came out of the courts invested unexpected officers of the mosque and the government with authority over mosque affairs. This is the mosque known as the Sunni Surti Randheri Juma Mosque of Rangoon. Built by a Muslim Surti trader from Nandher, known as Mullah Hashim, and managed by custodians from that community after his death. This mosque was a respite from the difficult urban conditions that new migrants to the city contended with from 1850 onwards. Where all private lots in Rangoon's town center were 100 by 600 feet, and most houses were divided into apartments occupying a single floor, this mosque occupied most of a city block and was 3 stories high. Within, Glossy teak floors reflected the light from Belgian glass chandeliers, and the expansiveness of the main prayer hall was accentuated by the height of the roof and the thickness of the walls that kept the building cool. Men washed away the dirt from the overcrowded city and watched colorful fish flit just under the surface of the water at the house as they cleaned their hands, arms, and faces in ritual ablution. Eid prayers at this mosque were an opportunity for gatherings of Muslims from around the city. The mosque was expanded and rebuilt in brick and stone in 1882, and then renovated again during the 20th century, at which time a magnificent pulpit arrived from India in two symmetrical halves, carved out of matching solid blocks of translucent marble. Mosque properties, including a 4-story building adjacent to the main building and 6 shops that lined the back wall, brought in rents that in turn supported the maintenance and periodic renovation of the mosque and paid the salary of the mosque imam and other mosque staff. Between 1908 and 1916, non-Randheri Muslims who worshipped at the Friday mosque, whose children attended the school that was run by mosque custodians, sought to establish their right to also be included in management of this important institution. As the Gujarati businessman knew, the Memon community in Mauritius had succeeded in asserting the congregation members' rights to be involved in the affairs of their mosque. Many societies around Rangoon modeled democratic community organization and control of assets. Inspired by these examples of democratic involvement of Muslim communities in the affairs pertaining to their religion, a few members of this community submitted their case, and it went on appeal to the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council. And in its decision, the JCPC drew on Anglo-Mohammedan law to assert that those who endowed mosques, known as banis, could make whatever arrangements for them that they chose. The benefactor of this mosque, Mullah Hashim, had chosen to restrict custodianship among a small ethnic group, and the court upheld his right to do so, and in doing so upheld the right of all banis to establish the guidelines for the ongoing management of their mosques. The often competing priorities that Muslims asserted for mosques emerged in printed books and pamphlets, government records, and the testimonies that they filed in the cases that they took to the colonial courts. In the United Provinces in the 1913 to 1916 period, conflicts between mosque-goers and Shias and Hindus taking out religious processions on the streets had led many Muslims to articulate their belief that the mosque perimeter had sanctity as the point of ingress and egress from the mosque. They argued that Muslims were expected to cleanse themselves and comport themselves appropriately as they entered the mosque, and did so in pamphlets, argued this in pamphlets such as this one. In his deposition for the court, the headmaster of a boys' high school at Aurangabad testified that there was a doctrinal basis for a relationship between a mosque and the streets that surrounded it, as Muslims made their way along those streets to prayers that they said in a mosque that conferred more blessings than those prayers said in a house. And they made their way along streets to prayers said in a Jummah mosque, a Friday mosque, that conferred more blessings than those said in other mosques. Faced with a variety of claims to the rights of devotionalism on the street, and deeply invested in maintaining a smooth flow of traffic, the courts did not confirm the absolute rights of Muslim worshippers outside mosques. Instead, it was figures such as this one. This is John Beam. He served as a district officer in Bengal and in the Punjab. And it was men such as this, city magistrates, who were authorized by the courts to evaluate all requests for observance of religious rites at that tense junction of the mosque and the street, and to issue the orders that they deemed appropriate to the situation. In doing this, the court made that colonial officer, the magistrate, and authority in a matter pertaining to Muslim devotionalism. In 1936, the mosque known as Shahid Ganj, represented by several prominent Muslims of Lahore, including the poet Muhammad Iqbal, appealed the decision of the authorities that had denied any Muslim rights to worship at this one-time mosque. It was part of an 18th century bequest by a Mughal-era governor of Lahore to honor the memory of the saint Hazrat Shah Kaku. This site included a hammam, several residential buildings and orchards, and it was recorded as a Sikh Gurdwara and a shrine to martyrs when the endowment was surveyed in 1849, because at that time, that was what this site was. The Waqfnama, or the deed of gift of 1722, that the Muslim litigators, that the Muslims presented to the courts, was not accepted as evidence of Muslim rights in this religious establishment at the time of the 1849 survey, owing to the application of a land rule that Muslims had been out of possession of this site for more than 12 years at the time of the survey, and the Sikh custodians had been in possession during that time. Muslims represented the belief that land once given over to a mosque should remain a mosque forever, and rules that governed ordinary transactions and claims in land simply did not apply here. But in 1940, the Privy Council ruled that the settlement land record and the decisions of that officer of the local government who recorded rights at the time of settlement were paramount in all subsequent evaluations of rights over land. In a final case that I take up in my book, a case related to a mosque in Kora, Jahanabad in the United Provinces, this case wound its way through the courts from the 1920s until July 1947. A Hindu official of the Muslim state of Awadh had converted to Islam and established this endowment in the 1700s. His descendants, still Hindu, had managed the site since his death. In the early 1900s, these custodians submitted documentation, including the plan that you see inset in the left of this image, recording it as a proprietary estate that contained a temple. Muslims were forbidden access to the mosque, Imam Bargah, and gardens that they had visited for over a century, and which are depicted on the larger plan that you see here, set in the back of the image. Organizing under the influence of local anjumans, Muslims tried to initiate charges of mismanagement of this site by the custodians. But under the existing civil procedures, an investigation could only be sanctioned by the Office of the Advocate General, an office that could not be moved to intervene in this case. Muslims at Kora Jahanabad were not the only group to be confronted by this insurmountable administrative hurdle. Hindu and Sikh associations, as well as Muslim ones, had been working on legislation intended to enable elected governments to regulate religious endowments and sanction inquiries into the management of religious sites. In the UP alone, Hindu endowments reported 344 lakhs of rupees in income, and Muslim ones 138 lakhs annually. Under legislation passed in 1923 and 1936, it became possible for the UP provincial government to appoint Waqf committees and a Waqf commissioner from among the upstanding, representative, and expert Muslims of regional associations, and to appoint these men to regulate the affairs of Muslim Waqfs and to advise the administration on public demands for investigations of custodians and endowments. When the Kora Jahanabad case came to the court, the officers of the Muslim Association, the All India Shia Conference, testified to the general Muslim expectations for the Waqf and the Hindu custodians' betrayal of those expectations. The Privy Council admitted their testimony, sanctioned a transfer of custodianship, and created a precedent for Muslim associations to be systematically involved as representatives of Muslim worshippers in legal disputes related to mosques. These officers were deeply connected to Muslim communities and had some expertise in matters pertaining to Islam and everyday Muslim concerns. Many of the Anjumans held elections and presented audited accounts to their members. Their systematic involvement in mosque affairs at the very end of empire marked the first effective engagement of a collective Muslim will in decisions relating to mosques in colonial India. The histories of disputes over mosques from 1880 to 1947 that I present in this book capture the textures and variety of devotional life across North India and Burma, from Rangoon in the east to Lahore in the west. The interests of worshippers coalesced even in these varied conditions and circumstances. Ritual in prayer halls, instruction in mosque schools, intersections with the street, the longevity and the financial regulation of mosques were debated extensively across the region through the colonial period. Characteristics of the mosques of colonial South Asia were identified and each treated distinctly in relation to relevant bodies of law and policy. And despite its single, unitary, and ubiquitous form, the mosque fractured in its service to Muslims under colonial law, different facets of Muslim concerns relating to mosques, inviting the involvement of different authorities. Together, the stories in this book reveal a pattern of adjudication of mosque affairs by paternalistic officers who used their discretion to make decisions for Muslim congregations. Unable to infer or produce religious law, the colonial courts repeatedly authorized such authority in and around the mosques of colonial South Asia. Thank you.